Peace, y'all. Yusi here. Let's talk about Cuba. So, Cuba has been in the news this past week, all over CNN, Fox, everything you could think of, talking about these protests supposedly taking place against the government because of economic hardship and COVID response. That's the script that the news agencies have been told to put out there. All right. Prior to 1959, the island of Cuba was pretty much what Las Vegas became after the 50s. American elites, US elites, really kind of controlled by the US mafia, would use the island of Cuba for their gambling, for their prostitution, for their hedonistic vacations. Cuba had a dictator backed by the United States government named Batista, and a group of revolutionaries, freedom fighters, who called themselves the July 26th movement, that consisted of Fidel Castro, Raul Castro, Che Guevara, and others. They left from Mexico, where they were, went back to Cuba for most of them, waged revolution, won, got rid of the US-backed dictator, and established a new government there. Those people at that time were not socialists, most of them. But after they removed the US's choice of dictator and made the determination to start setting up a government that would benefit the people, the US imposed sanctions against them and also invaded with the Bay of Pigs. And that pushed the Cuban government and Cuban revolution into the arms of the Soviet Union, after which time they became socialist and came into the orbit of the Soviet Union. Since that time, since 1960, despite the fact that Cuba has been under a U.S. economic blockade ever since for the past 60 years, the average life expectancy for Cuban citizens has increased. We're starting from where they were in a state of deep poverty. At this point in 2021, the Cuban average life expectancy is actually higher than that of the United States, the richest country in the world. And in infant mortality, in the past 60 years, Cuba has gotten to the point where their infant mortality rate is lower than that of the United States, all while living under a U.S. economic blockade. And to just underscore what that means, the U.S. government, when it puts these kinds of economic sanctions on a country, is declaring to the rest of the world that it is illegal to do business with that country of any kind, for the most part. Food, medicine, gasoline, it don't matter. If you do business with them, then you are, as far as the United States is concerned, breaking the law, and you are also subject to being sanctioned by them. This is their stated intention in doing this, is to starve the Cuban people to the point where they overthrow the government so that the U.S. is able to reinstall a government there that they approve of. This is crimes against humanity to the highest degree. Like, the African people being held as slaves in the U.S. is maybe the greatest crime against humanity ever committed anywhere in the world. But this level of intentionally trying to starve people to death so that they will overthrow their government is right underneath there somewhere. It's crazy. Um, and these news stories, this news coverage about Cuba seeks to give the impression that the Cuban people are rising up because their government is corrupt and inept. But if you're under U.S. sanctions, if the whole world is not allowed to do business with you, and yet you are still able to raise your standard of living for your people to the point where you are more likely to live a long life there than you are in the United States, then you're doing something extremely right. Like, not only are they not competent, they are extremely competent. They're competent as a motherfucker to be able to pull off what they're doing in Cuba. And the whole world knows it because many countries in the world rely on Cuban doctors to shore up their health systems. Like literally dozens, maybe hundreds of countries at this point have received the help of Cuban doctors in emergencies and also outside of emergencies when they just don't have the resources in place and institutions in place to properly provide health care for their people. Cuba is able to send doctors there and get it done, get people the health care that they need. And they even make these offers to us in the United States, especially the black people in the United States. But our good old government here doesn't allow that kind of help, even in the hood where we have close to no access to actual health care. So it is important for us to understand, like this past week, we've seen these coverage on CNN and other outlets of these, what are supposed to look like huge protests against the government. But actually, the protests against the Cuban government have been very small as well as planned outside of Cuba. There are videos you can easily find of people in Miami talking about how they are planning to go into Cuba to cause trouble, commit violence, try to influence other people to go out and commit violence, burn up police cars and things of that sort. And this is the same playbook that the U.S. Apparatus has played. They've done this in Venezuela. They've done this in Bolivia. They've done this in Nicaragua. This is all in the past 5 years. Like, this has happened over and over and over. You're not supposed to know that because they're not going to tell you about it on CNN, but this is just what they do. They plan these CIA operations. They pay some people to go act a fool, trying to seize upon whatever little small amount of discontent there may be against what the government is doing. And they figure if they can just be real loud about it, convince you to come out and join them in the streets and tear up some shit, that then they can justify going to actually overthrow the government in the process of all that rigmarole going on. The Cuban people ain't having it. So the pictures you've seen of these huge rallies are actually pro-government rallies in response to the anti-government protests put on by these people who are being paid to do that. In these pictures you can see banners that have Movimiento July 26th. The July 26th movement is the name of the revolution. When you see large groups of people holding banners that say July 26th, those are people who are supporting the Cuban government, not speaking against it. But these are the pictures they'll show you and say these are the anti-government protests on TV because you're not supposed to know any better. So allow me to tell you that the U.S. media is lying to you. The U.S. government is lying to you and attempting to rile you up so that you will support them and going to overthrow yet another democratically elected government. And yes, Cuba does have elections. The people have chosen to continue the revolution there in 2021, even after Cuban revolutionaries from the old days have become very apprehensive or afraid or insecure, wondering what might happen as the youth grow up, and that the people who actually took part in the early days of the revolution start to die out, will the next generations continue the tradition and continue to vote for the revolution, the Communist Party? And the fact is that they have, to the surprise of a lot of people. Like, the Cuban people are not stupid by any means. They know full well what it means that they have been under economic sanctions for 60 years. They understand who their friends are. They understand who their enemies are. And they're not going to let anybody tell them who should be in charge in Cuba. And speaking of their friends, let me say this before we get out of here. The Cuban Revolution has always been a tremendous, wonderful, beautiful friend of black people in the United States. Starting from the 60s with the Honorable Rob Williams going to Cuba when he had to get in exile after he was framed on some charges in North Carolina, to Assata Shakur and Nahanda Abiodun, and really many, many, many others who have been able to flee their oppression within the United States and go to Cuba to receive political asylum and receive just an open arms and friendship from fellow revolutionaries, fellow anti-imperialists. I don't know where our movement would be right now, really, if it wasn't for Cuba. Yeah, and Cuba has also popularized the plight of many of our political prisoners, being open to receiving the Black August hip-hop concerts started in the U.S. Cuba became a second home for this Black August movement, using hip-hop to spread awareness about the plight of those of our freedom fighters who are held in prison to this day. Yeah, just we should listen to Assata Shakur and choose to not allow our enemies to tell us who our friends should be. Cuba is our friend. The Cuban government is our friend. The people of Cuba are our friends. They deserve our actual support, not support for the U.S. imperialist agenda in Cuba. So when you see this SOS Cuba or anything of that sort suggesting that the U.S. government should go in and invade Cuba and install a new puppet, don't fall for it. Long live the revolution. Viva la revolución. Viva Fidel. Don't fall for the okie doke. Don't fall for the banana in the tailpipe. Stand with the actual people of Cuba, not the ones who live in Miami. Fact check. And listen to alternative sources of information like your guy here, like the BAM by Any Means Necessary Journal. I'm not going to start going down a list of people because I don't want to leave nobody out. But yeah, we out here. Alternative sources, independent media, people who are not bought and controlled by the U.S. government. This is where you need to get your information from. Or read a book. How about that? As always, available to you. All right. Peace.